Welcome, guys. This is Fertility Talks. It's actually my first time doing it from my end for Zoom because normally I go through another thing. But so hopefully this is all going to work out. So this is Fertility Talks. Welcome. Thank you for being here. And I'm so thrilled to have with us today, Kristina Virro. And we're going to, do your intro in 1 second. But for those of you who are joining us for the very first time, Fertility Talks is basically something that I've been doing for the past couple of years. So my name is Mary Wong, and I'm a doctor of traditional Chinese medicine, so acupuncturist, founder of Alive Holistic Health Clinic, author of Pathways to Pregnancy, and your fertility mentor. And the reason why I started this up is, there's just so much misinformation out there in the land of Dr. Google that I wanted to create something that is a reliable source of information, providing you with expert advice. So not just from myself, but from people like Kristina here. Do I call you Kristina or?
That's perfect. Kristina's just great.
Great. Yeah. So this is a segue to our topic today, which is about fertility diet and how to basically enhance your nutrition while you're going through fertility. And a couple of posts ago, I talked to naturopaths, but really this topic is open-ended. We can just talk about it forever. So I'm really thrilled to have you here. And you are, so for those of you who do not know, I love this, by the way. When I found out that you're both a psychotherapist and a holistic nutritionist, I thought, wow, that's a really interesting combination and so relevant.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's something I'm so passionate about, looking at how they both intersect, and they intersect in so many different areas of life, whether it's mental health, fertility, whatever it happens to be. I know even just for myself, if I'm not eating well, I don't feel as well. And that's what kind of got my gears turning about going into a profession that does both, because they are so interconnected. So I love talking about both sides.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, whether we're eating or not eating, there's always psychology behind it, right? So for you to tune into that, that's brilliant. Love it. So,
thank you.
Yeah. So, that's why I'm so excited to have you be here. And then, so, we can talk about the nutritional piece, but then dive into the psychological piece that goes behind it, right?
Absolutely.
So really, okay. So then the very first question is, what are some of the common factors that negatively impact one's ability to become pregnant?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to start by saying I love what you're doing here. I think it's so important because there is so much misinformation about infertility, especially. But one thing I want to start off with is that it's actually a lot more common than people think. The newest research says that 1 in 6 couples or individuals struggle with infertility. So if you're watching this and you're feeling like there's something wrong with you or that you're abnormal or whatever, please just get that out of your head. It's really, really common. But that said, there certainly are some things that we know negatively impact one's ability to become pregnant. So the biggest one is weight. So if somebody is overweight or obese, that immediately decreases their chances of naturally being able to become pregnant. If you are overweight, it increases your chances of infertility by, I think it's 27%. And if you are obese, that increases to over 75%. So weight is huge when it comes to infertility. We want to make sure that you're in a good zone for fertility, which is about an 18.5 to 24 on a BMI scale. It's really easy to calculate your BMI. You can just go into Google. That stands for body mass index. It takes into consideration your height, your weight, and then you go from there. That's the biggest factor for sure. From there as well, things like inflammation. If you have a lot of inflammation in your body, that's not going to help. As well as if you have blood sugar levels that are all over the place. There's actually a really strong correlation between insulin resistance, blood sugar levels that are all wacky, and infertility. So one of the biggest things we can do is look at how do we reduce inflammation, how do we stabilize blood sugar levels, and how do we catalyze weight loss so that you're in a healthy zone.
So, and these are all very important. And, for those of you watching, I also understand the receiving end. It's like, oh crap, right? Yeah. So when you listen to this, I think one of the first things to take away is that we actually don't need to be perfect. We don't have to have a perfect body. Mm-hmm. And listen, we do see people that are overweight that have babies and very quickly, right? So we can't just say, oh, if we have a higher BMI, automatically we're going to have fertility issues.
Absolutely.
we need to back up a wee bit and say, with the population of fertility issues, maybe there's a higher percentage of those that might have a higher BMI.
Yeah.
And would that be more accurate?
Yeah, I think it's also important. You bring up a really good point that you can also be thin and not healthy. So I think in our society, we use weight as a metric for health. And that isn't always the case. Like I said, we do know that one's chances of becoming pregnant might decrease if they have a higher BMI, but you can also be thin. And if you're not eating well and your insulin levels are all over the place, and your blood sugar levels all over the place, then you're still not really going to have a body that's really well equipped to handle fertility. So I really try to stay away from always using weight as the metric. It's a generalization for sure.
Yes. And that's what we're talking about, more of a generalization.
Yeah.
A couple of talks ago, I spoke to the acupuncturist, and she actually wrote a book called Fat and Fertile. And I have to say, I still cannot align with the title of the book. Sorry if you're watching. But yet I totally get the message behind it all. And again, the messaging being that we don't have to be perfect. And sometimes a healthier weight for one individual will be different than for someone else.
Yeah, definitely.
And the other point that you brought up that I want to address, when you said, eating well. Well, here's the thing. Some people will think, I'm eating really well, right?
Yeah.
But yet, not knowing or not having the trained help of someone like yourself, it's like, oh my gosh, maybe it's actually not so good for my body type.
Definitely. Right? Something I see very often in my practice is people will come in and say, I don't know why I'm feeling so crappy, or I don't know why I've gained weight. And then I look at their food journal and it breaks my heart because they're trying to make really good, healthy choices, like eating granola or protein bars, or, and it's really your fault that the food industry is not always on our side. They are trying to make food really tasty. They put in secret sugars, they put in secret fats and chemicals. And so that's where education is so important. So learning how to read a food label, learning the different names of sugar, things like that are kind of basic, but very important, because unfortunately our society does not always set us up for success when it comes to food. So it's a struggle, but that's why talks like these are so important. That's why what you're doing is so important, right?
Yeah. And I love it that you brought up the healthy bars.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Because they're filled with sugar. I never eat them because I look at them like, oh, it looks good, but I know it's all sugar.
Yeah.
But for a consumer, and you're like so busy and you don't have the time to read the labels, it's like you think that you're making a really healthy choice.
Oh my gosh, totally.
Right? So what do you do? Like, you're a busy person, you're working, all the time, and you're going to the fertility clinic, you want to eat well. So what's your advice here? Like, what do you tell this woman?
I usually say, along what you're saying with don't be perfect, don't feel like you need to be perfect, I follow myself a pretty strong 80-20 rule, which means that 80% of the time I'm eating clean, I'm eating real whole foods, I'm trying to cook myself. 20% of the time, it's just not happening, right? And that's okay too. And I also bring that up because I feel like women, especially who are struggling with infertility, it's very easy to start attacking yourself and to say things like, oh, maybe I'm not getting pregnant because I had that one chocolate bar last Thursday, right? And it causes this stress. And I think, no, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, if you're eating well 80% of the time, you're going to be okay, right?
Absolutely. So then how do you address this? Because you could say that, but then people will still walk away feeling guilt and shame and how they're eating or how they're not eating, how they're moving, how they're not moving.
Totally.
So what do you say to that?
Yeah, I always bring up with people that I see mental health in many different situations, whether it's fertility, anxiety, whatever, that there's a fine balance between compassion and accountability. So the accountable part of us can benefit from saying things like, okay, you know what? I can actually control what I put in my mouth. I can actually control how often I'm going to the gym. And that I find is very empowering because we can take our health into our own hands. We can make healthier choices. At the same time, we need to balance that with self-compassion too, because if you're only focusing on accountability and what you can do, you can become over responsible. If you're only focusing on being self-compassionate 100% of the time, then you might actually feel disempowered because you forget about all the things that you can do. So I try to remind people to walk that middle path of what can you do, what is in your control, what is going to help, and how do you make sure that you're not going to the extreme of feeling like you need to be this perfect Stepford wife who's always doing the right thing? You know what I mean? And what that looks like is, okay, maybe I do need to lose a little bit of weight to enhance my fertility. And I know that it doesn't mean I need to be a size 2. It doesn't mean that I need to have salad every day. It means that I can find the diet that's going to work best for me and also indulge sometimes without feeling awful, right? But there's a lot of training on how you do that practically in terms of self-talk, how you practice that in real life. So that's when therapy comes in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So you marry the two, which is awesome.
Yeah.
That's why I was excited when I heard that. And so then let's bring it to, well, what are some specific foods and nutrients that you would advise women to have when they're trying to get pregnant?
Sure. So the first rule of thumb that takes away a lot of the guesswork is to try to eat as many real whole foods that are not packaged or processed as possible. And I say that because I know it sounds super simple, but I also find that if you live by that rule of thumb, you're actually going to get a lot of benefits without having to think too hard. So if you stick to foods that are one ingredient, apple,
Yeah.
and that's pretty easy, right? You don't actually have to think too hard. The other thing that we do know when it comes to fertility is that we want to make sure that the mitochondria is functioning well. So to provide some explanation of what I mean, the mitochondria, you probably remember that from like high school bio, and it's known as the powerhouse of the cell. So what it does is it takes in different nutrients, it takes in oxygen, breaks those down to create energy. And when it comes to the egg and the embryo, we need to make sure that the mitochondria is working very efficiently in both of those. Otherwise, they can become lazy, so to say, the mitochondria. And then that can be an implication in infertility. So what reduces the efficiency of a mitochondria? That would be sugar, like we said. If you're eating trans fats or any food that's processed that's going to trigger inflammation, that can worsen the health of the mitochondria as well. And we want to focus on increasing mitochondria helping foods. So that actually looks like protein from various sources. Magnesium is a very nourishing ingredient or nutrient, for the mitochondria. So that would be dark leafy greens, pumpkin seeds, dark chocolate. I usually say 85% or above. That's really great. And consuming a lot of antioxidant rich foods. It's also worth noting that in terms of mitochondrial functioning, it's also important for men in their fertility because reduced mitochondrial functioning has been shown to reduce sperm motility as well.
Absolutely.
So for both,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. And then to add in, because it's an opportunity, when it comes to women's miscarriage, men contribute just as much.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
The people think that when a woman miscarries, it's like, well, you know what? A woman takes ownership and takes responsibility. And meanwhile, guess what? The sperm DNA has everything to do with it just as well.
Totally. And I always say as well that I don't know why, but infertility is kind of in its a league of its own still in terms of stigma. Like, for example, if you get a cancer diagnosis, nobody's going to come up to you and say, what did you do to bring that on?
Yeah.
With infertility, we rack our brains of what did I do? What could I have done differently? Is this my fault? And simultaneously, we have cancer runs. We have cancer pins. We have a color for cancer, and they're seen as real heroes, which they are. But there isn't the same sort of heroic nature surrounding infertility. I'm not sure why. So I remind people that infertility is a diagnosis, just like any other disease. So yes, there are things that you can do, but we also know that there are instances of unexplained infertility, right? Which is a horrible reality that we have to deal with, but it's not something that you 100% bring on by yourself as a woman, which is a really, really popular idea out there.
Yes. And like it's an individualized problem. And the reality is too, I think it's also a society problem.
Yeah.
Right?
Big time.
And because let's say we're going to bring in the weight thing. So like, let's say PCOS or endometriosis or those kinds of things. Well, in our society, women and couples in general are marrying, thinking about having babies much later on in life.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's not just strictly age. It's also, if you've had a condition for a prolonged period of time, then the condition might be worse, right?
Yes,
or more recalcitrant. Sure. So it's not strictly age.
Absolutely. And it's also, you know, I can't tell you how many women I've met who have said, I had no idea that my eggs basically go downhill at the age of 35. And I always say, well, that's not really your fault that you didn't know that. Like, a doctor probably should have told you along the way that that was a thing, right?
There's a challenge.
Yeah.
And then for those watching, because I don't like this either. So yes, there's a reality about quality in terms of after 35, but that doesn't mean it can't be helped with all the things that you're saying, right? Because we want to help the mitochondria. I always equate it back to, you know, you have a 35-year-old car, and one car, you've done nothing to it, and it's just sitting there rusting in the garage. And the other one, you're actually, you know, doing tune-ups and oil changes and whatever you do with cars, de-rusting, right? Yeah. So it's the same for our bodies.
Absolutely. Very good analogy. I love that.
So you mentioned protein, and, you know, women kind of go crazy when you say protein or carb, like they want specifics. So what are your top protein choices?
Yeah, so I actually want to touch on what you just said, which is the protein and carbs ratio kind of question as well, which is that when it comes to the research, there's really good evidence saying that a diet that has 45% of your calories or less coming from carbs is really great for fertility. So they had one study where they put women who were struggling with infertility on a low carb diet for 3 months. So that, again, that was 45% of their calories from carbs or lower. And they found that they were way more likely to become pregnant. And it also took only 2 cycles of IVF to become pregnant versus 4 cycles in the control group.
That's a great study.
Yeah, it was excellent. So it's not about necessarily eliminating carbs, but like you're saying, it's important to make sure that you have a well-rounded diet that includes protein and healthy fats in addition to some carbs.
I love that. Yeah. Sorry, I'm going to just jump in just because everybody thinks, oh my gosh, I need to be 0 carb now, right? And then they're lost. But it's also not about just having a plate of pasta and that's it.
Right. And it's
awesome.
Yeah, because I think it's hard because a lot of our meals are kind of only carbs. Like if we wake up and we have a muffin or a bagel, so protein and healthy fats are often very forgotten. So to answer your question about good protein sources, I say you can have from animal protein as well, but including plant-based protein is beneficial for anyone. So that could look like beans are a great source, nut butters, protein powders. I also say too, if you're just like, I don't really feel like having a chicken breast at every meal, then make yourself a really yummy smoothie with some protein powder, tofu, edamame, eggs, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, green peas, even lots of vegetables. Like there's a lot of veggies like broccoli even that contain higher protein than others. So you get a lot of variety.
Yeah. And I actually liked it that you added in the tofu and edamame so that there's less fear around it. And for those that have been participating prior, there's a post 136, I believe. And there was actually a research that was brought up with regards to having soy products and how it in fact help mitigate and decrease contamination and heavy metals in the body, I believe, something like that.
Yes. Yeah. There's been so much conflicting research about soy. So it's one of those topics that's very controversial, but is in terms of fertility, the most up-to-date research that I have found has concluded that soy is just fine. It doesn't have a negative impact at all. The only thing I would say when it comes to any soy product, this is the one area I would say 100% make sure you're going non-GMO because otherwise it is filled with junk. So non-GMO organic, if you can, that's the one area I'm like, that's a must with soy.
Yes. Thank you for that. And then, you know what, I'm going to just add in again for the vegetarians out there, you know, you're mentioning let's eat as whole as possible. Well, some of these vegan or vegetarian pretend meats, they're so filled. There's like 1,000 ingredients in it. So just because, right?
Yes. Yeah, same with gluten-free foods, like gluten-free desserts or baked goods or just like whatever, like quick gluten-free options filled with junk. You're better off just not doing that. And in some cases, when people go on gluten-free or some of these diets, sometimes they actually end up eating worse because they're just, I'm just going to eat all these packaged foods.
Yeah, you're right. Because because now there's a huge marketing shift, right? Oh,
Yeah.
this is gluten-free.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then I look at it and I'm scared, right? So
Yes.
anyway, so for those of you again out there, like we're not here to scare you. We just want to give you the information so you're empowered when you go to the grocery store.
Yes,
Right?
exactly.
Buy things that, as Kristina mentioned, like, one ingredient,
Mm-hmm.
two. When you buy meat, it's meat,
Yes, exactly.
period, right?
Yep, totally.
Versus fake meat, which is 20 ingredients.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's funny too, because sometimes I'll look at these to go protein bars or whatever. And there are some that say, oh, we only have this many grams of sugar and it's lower and we have a ton of protein. But as you're saying, the ingredient list is so long. So personally, I would rather get one that's like, this has figs, dates, some egg whites, and that's it, because I know what those are. And I know that
Yes.
my body knows what to do with them. So that's just how I stay within my comfort zone. If I'm busy and need something quick, I usually go for the fewer ingredients. The easier they are to read, the better.
That's awesome. Love it. Okay. Now, is there, well, you mentioned the less than 45% carb.
Yeah.
Now, is there any kind of other specific type of diet to help?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to bring up the ketogenic diet actually, because a lot of women ask me about that. And I will say there is a place for the ketogenic diet. And even though most of our research is focusing on low carb infertility, and that has been very promising, we are starting to see a few studies now that are specifically looking at the ketogenic diet and fertility. And it has been promising, mainly because it helps to stabilize insulin levels, which is great. It can really help with insulin resistance. It stabilizes hormones, and it actually has been shown to improve mitochondrial functioning. So that's all very promising. But I will say that there is a wrong way to do keto, because some people say, oh, great, I get to just eat fat. So I'm going to have pepperettes and bacon and burger patties every single day. And they might lose a lot of weight, but I know that their insides just probably aren't happy. So how I would do the ketogenic diet is, keeping your carbs low for sure, but also making sure that you're including lots of fats from good, healthy sources. We're talking coconut oil, avocados, ghee, that kind of a thing. And you can really eat a ton of veggies that taste delicious on the ketogenic diet, because you can include a bit more fat, but also not negating protein, because that's another thing I've noticed with ketogenic dieters is that they say, oh, I need to eat so much fat and protein eventually breaks down to sugar, so I shouldn't eat it. And there's all this misinformation about that. That's simply not really accurate. So I would say you can do like probably 60% of your calories from fat, and then the rest from protein is just fine. And then keeping your carb count low. If the ketogenic diet is not for you, the Mediterranean diet also has some amazing research behind it. And it's a lot more accessible for most people and a lot less restrictive. So the Mediterranean diet would say whole grains, which are great. You can have lots of olive oil, you can have a bit of red wine, and they would mainly just limit eggs, dairy, and red meat. So that's another one that's basically encapsulating what we've talked about. It's just with a different title.
Yeah, no, and that's great. Is there anything to that then? I think that's pretty good. Oh, yes, intermittent fasting.
Yes, that's a great one. Yeah, great question.
Yeah.
So intermittent fasting is really helpful for fertility, and I can explain why. The reason why is that there's a group of proteins called cytokines that our body makes, and they're proteins that are created by the immune system that tell the cells to go to sites of inflammation or trauma in the body. There's two different types of cytokines. One is pro-inflammatory, so they cause inflammation. The other is anti-inflammatory, so they reduce inflammation. When it comes to fertility, for women especially, if you have higher levels of the pro-inflammatory cytokines, then that can get in the way a little bit of getting pregnant. So intermittent fasting, how it links is that when you fast, you actually can really impact your levels of pro-inflammatory cytokines really quickly. And the reason they found this out was that they started studying people who were doing Ramadan, and they found that regardless of if they lost weight or not, they studied their levels of inflammation in the body, and actually they looked at their cytokine levels and they were like, whoa, they have really, really gone down. So I recommend intermittent fasting. The easiest one to do is the 16:8 ratio, which means that you only eat within an 8-hour window. And that's actually pretty easy once you get into the routine of it. And then you just kind of eat normally within that 8-hour window. but I would recommend it if you're dealing with infertility specifically.
Is there, well, you know what? When you say infertility specifically, it's not so specific because, as you know, there's a lot of different kinds of conditions that go along with it. Right?
Oh, yeah.
So is there another specific profile that, like, for example, is PCOS better on that versus
Well,
endometriosis?
That's a good correction, because you could gain benefits from intermittent fasting kind of regardless of what your situation is, just because what it's doing is it's helping your body detoxify. It's also helpful from the standpoint that you're probably less likely to eat bad calories, just simply because you're not eating as often, right? A lot of people at night is when they do a lot of their binge eating or snacking. That's unhealthy. And when you have to keep things within an 8-hour window, it actually just kind of helps to bookend that and say, okay, so I can't really eat all my junk food at night, right? But I would say it can be beneficial for pretty much every group. The only time I wouldn't suggest probably intermittent fasting or the ketogenic diet, and this is where the mental health part of me is coming in, is if somebody has an eating disorder history, just because if you are used to restricting or monitoring calories or whatever, then I definitely would not recommend either of those for somebody with an eating disorder history.
Okay, very good. And then, are people overlapping the intermittent dieting with the keto?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's totally cool.
Totally fine. You can do intermittent fasting, whether you're doing keto, whether you're eating carbs, whatever. It just can be really, really helpful to, like I said, cleanse the body, reduce inflammation. That said, I do want to say that these are just generalizations that I'm making. These are general recommendations, but it's really important to remember that everybody's body is unique. What works for me definitely might not work for you. And if somebody's doing the ketogenic diet or something like that, and they're like, you know what, I hate this, then we stop, right? Like, there's no need to force yourself to do things that you don't like.
Absolutely. And some people, do better with very small portions throughout the day. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. So you have to be mindful as well of your body type, your preferences, your lifestyle, all those things.
Yeah. But when I think of the intermittent diet, I'm thinking more of like a European style eating habit, because they don't really snack there. They just have they have like really good meals, like really good lunches, really good dinners, not much for breakfast. So I think that they kind of go towards that kind of lifestyle.
For sure. For sure.
So I think, is there anything else, any words of wisdom that you want to provide with everyone here? Because it's probably time to say goodbye for now.
Yeah, for sure. I really would like to end. If anybody watching is, again, this is kind of the therapist in me coming out, but what I have learned from dealing with individuals, couples, women, men, whoever, who are struggling to get pregnant, is they are some of the most resilient people I have ever met. They are so resourceful. They are so strong. And I feel like many of them don't see themselves that way in these moments when it's a real struggle. And yet from my chair, I'm like, wow, you're doing so much. You're working so hard. For everybody watching this, just the fact that you got out of bed this morning and were like, I'm going to watch a Facebook talk to figure out what I can do. Like, the resilience that you have is amazing. So don't take that for granted. Give yourself a pat on the back. Hang in there.
Love that.
That's all I want to end this with.
Oh my gosh. And it's so heartfelt, for sure, because that is truly who they are. And because you're a therapist, you see it like all the time. Women think that they're weak. And I'm like, no.
Oh, like, gosh.
Wow, you're so courageous. And
I know.
Wow, you're embracing this every day. And as you say, just getting out of bed. Like, whoa, that's awesome.
No, actually though. So yeah, that's what I would like to end with.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll have to have you back another time for sure. Because we didn't even get you talking about supplements, right? So we'll do that. Yeah. So thank you, Kristina. For those of you watching, you can find her. What's your website?
It's fresh-insight.ca.
Okay, so maybe at the end you can just type it in for everyone too.
No problem.
And so right now you're watching it on Facebook, but after it's going to go on YouTube. So like it, share it, just subscribe, because we have over 140 something videos now. So this is all information for you and to be shared and to be, give you some hope and some sort of inspiration, right?
Yes.
To feel a little bit more in control of your own fertility and what you can do.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So I think next time, actually, I don't know when I'm going on next time, but it's going to be awesome. Whatever it is, it's always awesome. And, but yeah, I'm actually, I'm going to be away in Mexico, and I found a fertility clinic in Puerto Vallarta who has people going there for IVFs. So it's international. I thought that is so cool. So I'm going to interview the founder there and just see how they're doing it there, because why not, right? Because people do, and I know for sure that it's going to be less expensive than the US, 100%. And I'm pretty sure it's less than Canada. And so I'm just going to, check it out and see how it is.
Report back.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so marywong.life, you can check out there. If you don't have the book Pathways to Pregnancy, you can get that. This is a great time. And I'm working on the audio version of my book, and hopefully coming out in January or February, depends on how long it will take to edit. But all these kinds of talks that we're talking about, I do actually address in my book, but I love the nitty gritty with the other people. So awesome. And again, like the page, Alive Holistic Health Clinic. And by the way, prior to this, it was under the Mary Wong RTC MP page. So it's a little complicated, but so then really it's easiest to head on to my YouTube channel, which is Mary Wong Acupuncturist. Okay, see you guys next time. Thank you so much, Kristina.
My pleasure.